Hello, everyone. Welcome to my public lecture. And the lecture topic that I want to share with you in this video is the coming silence. What happens if birds disappear? Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and hearing nothing. No sparrow outside the window, no minnow calling from the roof, no crow announcing the morning, no swallow crossing the sky, no bird song in the trees. At first, we might enjoy the silence, then we will realize something terrifying. The silence is not peace, it is a warning. The disappearance of birds would not simply mean that we had lost beautiful creatures. It would mean that the biological systems supporting our own civilization were being dismantled. Scientific research shows that birds perform major ecological functions, including seed dispersal, pollination, like bees, insects, and pest control, scavenging, nutrient cycling, and decomposition. They are also unusually useful indicators of ecosystem health because they respond visibly to environmental change. And remarkably, long before modern ecology gave us the language of ecosystem services, in the Bible, which repeatedly presented birds as creatures known, fed, valued, and cared for by God. So, why should we care about birds? Let me begin with a provocative question. If birds disappeared tomorrow, would humanity survive? The answer is not as simple as no birds means no humans. Human beings would not immediately collapse for sure. We will still have our buildings, we'll still have our electricity, we will still have our technology, we'll still have our supermarkets, and things will be still ongoing, but something much deeper would begin to unravel. Because ecosystems are not collections of independent organisms. They are networks of relationships. A forest is not simply trees. A river is not simply water. A soil system is not simply dirt. And a bird is not simply a bird. A bird is a participant in a vast biological network. Remove enough participants from that network, and the network begins to behave differently. And that is the central idea I want you to remember in this video. Extinction is not merely the disappearance of species, it is the disappearance of relationships. Interesting, right? Now let's look at the next point. Birds are ecological infrastructure. Well, we normally think of infrastructure, right, as when you imagine infrastructure, you would imagine infrastructure as roads, bridges, electricity grids, and telecommunications. But nature has infrastructure too, and birds are part of it. Consider a fruit-eating bird. It eats the fruit, it flies several kilometers, it deposits the seed somewhere else. That apparently insignificant act may determine where the next generation of tree grows. Now, imagine thousands of birds performing that function every day. Suddenly, the bird is not merely eating, it is building a forest. Scientists identify seed dispersal as one of the major ecological services provided by birds, and other birds pollinate plants, consume insects, redistribute nutrients, and remove carrion, which we can refer from Science Direct channel. So when we ask what happens if birds disappear, we should actually ask what happens when an ecological workforce disappear. So here is an idea I would introduce at PhD level. Ecological function is not necessarily proportional to human visibility. We tend to value things according to what we can immediately see. A bird sitting on a branch looks decorative, right? But its ecological contribution may be invisible. What are they doing? The bird may be controlling insect populations, dispersing seeds, pollinating flowers, transporting nutrients, removing carrion, connecting ecosystems, feeding other organisms, indicating environmental degradation. This creates a profound problem. And the most important ecological services are often the least visible. We notice the bird, we don't notice the system it maintains. Now, let's hear this terrifying concept that I'm going to bring it up to you now, which is functional extinction. One of the most crucial distinctions in conservation biology is between extinction, a species has completely disappeared, and functional extinction means the species technically still exists, but its population has become so minority, right? Miniature that it no longer performs its former biological role, or sorry, not biological role, ecological role effectively. This distinction is critical. A species doesn't need to reach zero individuals before ecosystems begin to suffer. Research on birds has specifically warned that functional extinction can precede actual population extinction, meaning ecological services may be lost before a species disappears completely. So think about a forest containing 10,000 fruit-eating birds. Suppose their population falls to 100. Technically, the birds still exist. Ecologically, the system has changed dramatically. That is why counting species alone can be misleading. The real question is how much ecological function remains. So this is the warning produced by the North American. We already have a powerful real-world example. A major study published in Science estimated that North America, right? North America lost approximately 3 billion birds, around 29% of its 1970 abundance over 48 years. Okay, so the declines were not restricted to rare species. Many once common birds declined as well. That finding changed the conversation because conversation traditionally ask which species are endangered. But another question is how many living individuals are we losing? A species can be common today and still be disappearing tomorrow. And that is why abundance matters. Now, this is another intriguing factor. Birds are biological smoke alarms. Birds are the smoke alarms of ecosystems. When bird populations decline, they can be telling us something is wrong. Perhaps habitat is disappearing. Forests are being fragmented. Pesticides are affecting food webs. Climate patterns are changing. Pollution is increasing. Invasive species are spreading. Wetlands are being destroyed. And the birds are not necessarily the original problem. Sometimes they are the symptom of the losing of the ecological system in our world. And the U.S. Geological Survey describes birds as excellent indicators of ecosystem condition since they respond to environmental change and perform important ecological functions. So when the birds become silent, We should not merely ask, where did the birds go? We should ask, what happened to the world that could no longer support them? Now, when I'm going to relate this to Bible, science asks, what function do birds perform? The Bible asks, who are these creatures in relation to their creator? And this is a fundamentally different question. And this is where science and technology can enter a fascinating conversation. When we look at it in Genesis 1 presents birds as part of God's creative work, right? God created every winged bird according to its kind, and God saw that it was good. And the birds are not introduced merely as tools for humanity. They are first presented as creatures of God, and God blesses them and commands them to multiply in Genesis. And that is uniquely and profoundly crucial. So creation is not merely human property. One of the dangers of a purely utilitarian worldview is this. If something benefits humans, protect it. If it doesn't, ignore it. But biblical creation theology, right, challenges that framework. The world belongs first to God. In Psalm 50 to 11 declares that God knows that the birds of the hills and the creatures of the field belong to Him. This means a bird has value before we calculate its economic value. Its worth is not determined solely by tourism, agriculture, scientific usefulness, beauty, or illegal poaching, human entertainment. Its existence is embedded in God's creation. Even Jesus tells us to look at birds, right? Jesus says, look at the birds of the air. Notice that verb. Jesus doesn't say ignore the birds. He says, look, pay attention, observe, learn. The birds become theological teachers. So Jesus uses them to teach humanity about God's providence, which is divine providence. And even in it says in Luke, right? They do not sow, reap, or store in barns, yet the Father feeds them. And Luke specifically says, consider the ravens. So the birds become part of Jesus's argument about anxiety, provision, and trust. And this is so much extraordinary. The bird is not merely an object of study, it becomes a teacher. So, and Jesus goes even farther, right? He say that not even a sparrow falls outside the Father's care. So think about the theological revolution contained in that image. A sparrow was inexpensive, in the eyes of people, right? Um, Ordinary, small, easy to overlook. Yet Jesus says, in fact, God notices what humans overlook. And here is where the environmental message becomes deeply us, deeply Christian. If God notices the sparrow, can we justify becoming indifferent to the destruction of his habitat? If creation matters to God, shouldn't creation matter to us? So, so in this part, we can bring the two disciplines together, right? Science tells us bird decline can indicate ecological degradation and can reduce important ecosystem functions. And the Bible tells us that birds are creatures belonging to God's creation and are used by um, it is shown in the Bible as witnesses to divine providence. So the disappearance of birds is not merely a conservation problem, it is also a question of human responsibility. So what would exactly happen if birds disappeared? Let us now imagine the scenario. Yeah? The scenario scientifically. The silence, the first one is morning bird song disappears. We experience the loss culturally and psychologically. And stage one, that was stage one. And stage two, insect dynamics change. Many birds consume enormous number of insects. With fewer birds, some insect populations may change or may arise dramatically. And stage three, seed dispersal declines. Plants that depend heavily on birds for seed movement become increasingly restricted in their ability to colonize new areas. And stage four, pollination networks weaken. And some plants lose important pollination interactions. So stage five, nutrient cycling changes. Scavenging and nutrient transfer functions are reduced. And stage six, food webs reorganize. Predators lose prey, plants lose dispersers, insects lose predators, ecological relationships are rewired. And stage seven, human systems experience consequences. Agriculture, forestry, biodiversity, ecosystem resilience, and cultural life can all be affected. Yeah? Birds contribute to supporting, regulating, provisioning, and cultural ecosystem services. So the disappearance of birds will not produce a single catastrophe, right? It will produce a cascade, right? It's like a momentum of downfall, a cascade. So the cascade is more frightening than the disappearance. Imagining removing one thread from a piece of fabric, nothing dramatic happens. Remove another, still nothing, right? Remove hundreds, eventually you discover something. So the fabric was being held together by relationships you couldn't see. So this is the ecological problem. We often notice collapse only after resilience has already been lost. Recent research has warned that land use change can reduce avian functional diversity and ecosystem resilience, particularly by affecting groups responsible for functions such as seed dispersal and insect predation. So, um, so I just want to pinpoint the last part, okay? The last part with another two more facts. So biodiversity is not merely a collection of species, it is a network of relationships, functions, and dependencies. So the deeper problem is the great danger is not that birds disappear. Perhaps the greatest danger is that we stop noticing. First, the bird disappears, then we stop expecting it. Then children grow up without hearing it. Then photographs replace experience. Then extinction becomes normal. And eventually, someone asks, was there ever really a bird here? And that is how ecological amnesia, yeah, that is called, there's in medical term amnesia, memory lost. But now in this term, I am matching it with ecological. So ecological amnesia. So that is how ecological amnesia works. Each generation accepts a poorer world because it never experienced the richer one. So what kind of world are we handing to our next generation? Imagine teaching a child, this is what a sparrow sounded like, not listen, but this is what it used to sound like. So that is the tragedy of environmental loss. We don't merely lose organisms, we lose experiences, we lose ecological knowledge, we lose cultural memory, we lose wonder, and perhaps most painfully, we lose opportunities for future generations to encounter the living world that shaped us. So, as a conclusion of my public lecture for this video, um, if the bird disappears, right? If the birds disappear, we will not simply lose birds. We will lose pieces of the living architecture that makes our world habitable. And if we believe that the world belongs to God, then protecting that architecture is not merely environmental activism, it is stewardship. Yeah, not environmental activism. It's not about being an activist. So when you hear a bird tomorrow morning, don't hear noise. Hear a system walking, hear creation speaking, hear a reminder of providence, and perhaps hear a question from God. What will you do with the world I entrusted to you? So this is my public lecture for this video. I'll see you um, in my next video with an interesting or intriguing topic. And God bless you bountifully in every aspect of your life. Remember, God loves you so much. Bye bye.